Welcome to Toxic from Reddit, where real toxic relationship stories come to life. Here you'll hear true stories from people who experience toxic relationships from different perspectives. Partners dealing with cheating, manipulation, gaslighting, red flags, and all the emotional chaos that comes with loving someone who hurts you. Stories of betrayal, of finding strength to leave, of discovering the truth, of heartbreak, of healing, and the raw reality of toxic love. This is a real story, shared anonymously on Reddit. Some details have been changed to protect the identity of the people involved. Hi everyone, my name is Lauren, I'm 29 years old, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia. And I need to tell you about the most horrifying and disturbing discovery that has completely shattered my relationship and has revealed that the man I've been living with for the past year and a half is a monster, which is that 2 weeks ago, my boyfriend's 16-year-old daughter came to me in tears and confessed that she's 4 months pregnant. And when I asked her about the father, she broke down and told me that her boyfriend isn't the father, that her own father, my boyfriend, has been sexually abusing her for the past 3 years, that he's the biological father of her baby, that he's been threatening her to keep her silent, that she's been living in terror in her own home, and that she finally found the courage to tell me because she's desperate for help and doesn't know what else to do. And now I'm dealing with the nightmare of having to protect this child, having to report this monster to the authorities, having to come to terms with the fact that I've been living with and loving a predator who's been abusing his own daughter, and having to figure out how I missed the signs of this horrific abuse happening right under my nose. I'm going to tell you this entire story from the beginning, because the level of evil and manipulation involved is so disturbing that you need to understand how a predator can hide in plain sight, and how an entire family can be deceived by someone who appears normal on the surface. My boyfriend's name is Richard, he's 42 years old, and we met about 2 years ago through a dating app, and I thought he was a great guy, a devoted single father, and someone I could build a future with. Richard's daughter's name is Emma. She just turned 16 years old 3 months ago, and she's the bravest person I've ever met for having the courage to tell me the truth about what her father has been doing to her. I work as an elementary school teacher in Atlanta, and I had been single for about 6 months when I matched with Richard on a dating app. Richard's profile showed an attractive, professional-looking man who described himself as a single father raising his teenage daughter after his wife had passed away from cancer several years earlier. Richard's profile said that he worked as an accountant, that he loved spending time with his daughter, and that he was looking for a serious relationship with someone who understood that his daughter would always be his priority. I was touched by Richard's devotion to his daughter, and I thought it showed that he was a caring and responsible person. We started chatting on the app, and Richard seemed kind, thoughtful, and genuine. After about a week of chatting, Richard asked me out to dinner, and I agreed. On our first date, Richard told me about his life, about how his wife had died from breast cancer when Emma was 9 years old, and about how he had been raising Emma as a single father for the past 7 years. Richard spoke lovingly about Emma, and he said that she was the most important person in his life, and that any woman he dated would need to understand that Emma came first. I appreciated Richard's honesty and his dedication to his daughter, and I thought it was admirable that he was such a devoted father. Richard and I continued dating, and after about 2 months, Richard introduced me to Emma. Emma was 13 years old at the time, and she seemed like a sweet, quiet, shy girl. I noticed that Emma seemed uncomfortable around her father, like she would tense up when Richard touched her shoulder or hugged her, and she didn't make much eye contact with him. I thought at the time that Emma was probably just shy or maybe uncomfortable with her father dating someone new, so I didn't think too much of it. Over the next several months, Richard and I grew closer, and I started spending more time at Richard's house. Richard and Emma lived in a nice suburban house in a good neighborhood, and everything seemed normal on the surface. I would sometimes stay over at Richard's house on weekends, and I noticed that Emma would often stay in her room and wouldn't come out much when I was there. Richard would say that Emma was just being a typical teenager who wanted her privacy, and I accepted that explanation. About a year into our relationship, Richard asked me to move in with him, and he said that it would be good for Emma to have a positive female role model in her life. I was hesitant at first because I wasn't sure if Emma was ready for me to move in, but Richard convinced me that it would be fine. I moved into Richard's house about a year and a half ago, and I tried to build a relationship with Emma. Emma was polite to me, but she remained distant and quiet, and she spent most of her time in her room. I would try to engage Emma in conversation or invite her to do activities with me, but she would usually decline or would give short, one-word answers. I talked to Richard about Emma's behavior, and Richard said that Emma was going through a difficult phase and that she was struggling with typical teenage issues like school stress and social anxiety. Richard said that Emma was seeing a therapist to help her work through her issues, and that I should just give her space and time. I accepted Richard's explanation, although I felt sad that I couldn't connect with Emma the way I had hoped. I noticed other things about Emma's behavior that concerned me, like she seemed very anxious and jumpy. She had trouble sleeping, and I would often hear her moving around the house late at night. She didn't seem to have many friends and rarely went out, and she seemed depressed and withdrawn. I mentioned these concerns to Richard, and Richard would always have an explanation. Like he would say that Emma was stressed about school, or that she was going through normal teenage mood swings, or that she was still grieving her mother. Richard would also say that he was handling it and that Emma was getting help from her therapist, so I shouldn't worry. I trusted Richard, and I believed that he knew his daughter better than I did, so I didn't push the issue. About 6 months ago, I noticed that Emma had started dating a boy from her school, and Richard seemed very upset about it. Richard said that Emma was too young to be dating, and that he didn't trust teenage boys. Richard became very strict with Emma about her relationship. Like he would set early curfews, he would demand to know where Emma was at all times, and he would sometimes forbid Emma from seeing her boyfriend. I thought Richard was being overprotective, and I tried to talk to him about giving Emma more freedom, but Richard said that he was just trying to protect his daughter. I noticed that Emma seemed even more anxious and withdrawn after she started dating her boyfriend, and I wondered if the stress of dealing with her father's strict rules was affecting her. About 3 months ago, I started noticing that Emma's body was changing, like she seemed to be gaining weight around her midsection, and her face looked fuller. I wondered if Emma might be pregnant, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions or invade her privacy. I thought about talking to Richard about my concerns, but I wasn't sure how to bring it up. About 2 weeks ago, I was home alone with Emma because Richard was working late at the office. I was in the kitchen making dinner when Emma came downstairs, and I could see that she had been crying. I asked Emma if she was okay, and Emma just stood there looking at me with tears streaming down her face. I said, "Emma, what's wrong? Please talk to me. I want to help you." Emma started sobbing, and she said, "I need to tell you something, but I'm scared." I said, "You can tell me anything. I promise I won't judge you, and I'll do whatever I can to help you." Emma took a deep breath and she said, "I'm pregnant." I felt my heart sink, and I said, "Okay, how far along are you?" Emma said, "About 4 months." I said, "Does your father know?" Emma shook her head and said, "No, and I'm terrified to tell him." I said, "What about your boyfriend? Does he know?" Emma started crying harder and she said, "My boyfriend isn't the father." I was confused and I said, "I don't understand. If your boyfriend isn't the father, then who is?" Emma looked at me with absolute terror in her eyes, and she said, "My dad is the father." I felt like the world stopped spinning, and I said, "What did you just say?" Emma said, "My dad has been raping me since I was 13 years old. He's been doing it for 3 years, and he's the father of my baby." I felt like I was going to be sick, and I couldn't process what Emma was telling me. I said, "Emma, are you sure? Are you absolutely sure about what you're telling me?" Emma nodded and said, "Yes, I'm sure. He comes into my room at night when you're asleep. He threatens me and tells me that if I ever tell anyone he'll hurt me or he'll hurt you. He said that no one would believe me anyway, because everyone thinks he's such a great father." I started crying and I said, "Emma, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Emma said, "I was too scared. I didn't know if you would believe me, and I didn't know what he would do if I told. But I can't hide the pregnancy anymore, and I don't know what to do." I hugged Emma, and I said, "I believe you, and I'm going to protect you. We need to get you out of this house right now, and we need to call the police." Emma looked terrified, and she said, "What if they don't believe me? What if they think I'm lying?" I said, "They will believe you, and we're going to make sure you're safe." I immediately grabbed my phone and I called 911, and I told the dispatcher that I needed police to come to the house immediately because a child was being sexually abused. The dispatcher asked me questions about the situation, and I explained that my boyfriend's daughter had just disclosed to me that her father had been sexually abusing her for 3 years, and that she was pregnant as a result of the abuse. The dispatcher said that police and child protective services would be sent to the house immediately, and that I should keep Emma safe until they arrived. I packed a bag for Emma with some of her clothes and belongings, and I told her that we were going to leave the house and wait outside for the police. Emma was shaking and crying, and she kept saying that she was scared about what was going to happen. I told Emma that she was incredibly brave for telling me the truth, and that I was going to make sure she was protected. We went outside and waited in my car, and within about 15 minutes, 2 police cars and a child protective services worker arrived at the house. The police officers and the CPS worker talked to Emma and to me separately, and Emma told them everything about the abuse. Emma told them that Richard had started sexually abusing her when she was 13 years old, shortly after I had started dating him. Emma said that Richard would come into her room late at night after I had fallen asleep, and he would assault her. Emma said that Richard would threaten her, and would tell her that if she ever told anyone, he would say that she was lying and that no one would believe her. Emma said that Richard had told her that if she reported him, he would go to prison and she would be put in foster care and would lose her home. Emma said that the abuse had been happening regularly for the past 3 years and that she had gotten pregnant about 4 months ago. Emma said that she had tried to hide the pregnancy by wearing baggy clothes and that she had been terrified about what would happen when Richard found out. The police officers were incredibly compassionate with Emma, and they assured her that she had done the right thing by telling me and by reporting the abuse. The CPS worker said that Emma would need to be placed in protective custody immediately, and that she couldn't stay in the house with Richard. I said that Emma could stay with me, and that I would make sure she was safe. The CPS worker said that they would need to do an investigation and an assessment, but that it might be possible for Emma to stay with me temporarily if I was willing to be her foster placement. I said that I absolutely wanted Emma to stay with me, and that I would do whatever was necessary to protect her. The police officers said that they needed to arrest Richard, and they asked me when Richard would be home from work. I told them that Richard usually got home around 7 o'clock in the evening, which was in about 2 hours. The police officers said that they would wait for Richard to come home, and that they would arrest him at that time. The CPS worker took Emma to the hospital to have a medical examination and to document any evidence of abuse, and I went with them. At the hospital, Emma was examined by a doctor who specializes in child abuse cases, and the doctor confirmed that Emma was about 4 months pregnant. The doctor also found evidence consistent with long-term sexual abuse. The doctor was kind and gentle with Emma, and she explained to Emma what would happen next in terms of the investigation and the legal process. After the medical examination, the CPS worker, Emma, and I went back to Richard's house, and the police officers were still there waiting for Richard to come home. When Richard arrived home from work, he seemed surprised to see the police cars in the driveway. Richard got out of his car and walked toward the house, and the police officers approached him and told him that he was under arrest for child sexual abuse. Richard's face went white, and he said, "What are you talking about? There must be some mistake." The police officer said, "Your daughter has disclosed that you've been sexually abusing her for the past 3 years, and we have evidence to support her allegations." Richard looked at me and at Emma, and he said, "This is ridiculous. Emma is lying. She's a troubled teenager who's angry at me for being strict with her." Emma started crying, and I put my arm around her. Richard said, "Lauren, you can't believe this. You know me. You know I would never do something like this." I looked at Richard with disgust, and I said, "I believe Emma, and you're a monster." The police officers handcuffed Richard and put him in the back of the police car, and Richard was taken to jail. After Richard was arrested, the CPS worker said that Emma could stay with me temporarily while the investigation continued, and that I would need to go through a background check and a home assessment to be approved as Emma's foster placement. I agreed to do whatever was necessary, and I took Emma to my parents' house because I didn't want her to stay in Richard's house where the abuse had occurred. My parents were shocked and horrified when I told them what had happened, and they immediately welcomed Emma into their home and told her that she was safe with us. Over the next several days, Emma was interviewed multiple times by police detectives and by forensic interviewers who specialize in child abuse cases. Emma was incredibly brave throughout the interviews, and she provided detailed information about the abuse and about Richard's threats and manipulation. The police investigation revealed that Richard had been very calculated in how he abused Emma. Like, he would wait until I was asleep before going into Emma's room. He would threaten Emma to keep her silent, and he would manipulate Emma by telling her that the abuse was her fault or that she had somehow caused it. The investigation also revealed that Richard had been isolating Emma from her friends and from potential support systems, which is a common tactic used by abusers to maintain control over their victims. The police obtained a search warrant for Richard's house and his electronic devices, and they found evidence on Richard's computer that corroborated Emma's allegations. Richard was charged with multiple counts of child sexual abuse, incest, and statutory rape, and he's currently in jail awaiting trial. Richard's attorney tried to get him released on bail, but the judge denied bail because Richard is considered a danger to the community and a flight risk. I've been working with the CPS worker and with Emma's attorney to make sure that Emma gets the support and services she needs. Emma has been assigned a therapist who specializes in trauma and sexual abuse, and she's been attending therapy sessions twice a week. Emma has also been seeing a doctor who specializes in high-risk pregnancies, because Emma's pregnancy is considered high risk due to her age and due to the circumstances of the conception. Emma has had to make some very difficult decisions about her pregnancy, and after talking with her therapist, her doctor, and with me, Emma has decided that she wants to continue the pregnancy and place the baby for adoption after it's born. I've been supporting Emma in whatever decision she makes, and I've been helping her connect with adoption agencies and with resources for pregnant teenagers. Emma has been living with me at my parents' house for the past 2 weeks, and I've been trying to help her feel safe and supported. Emma is still very traumatized by what happened to her, and she has nightmares and anxiety attacks. But she's been working hard in therapy, and she's been incredibly resilient. I've been going to therapy myself to help me process what happened, because I'm struggling with a lot of guilt and anger. I feel guilty that I didn't see the signs of abuse, and I feel angry at myself for not protecting Emma. My therapist has been helping me understand that Richard was very skilled at hiding his abuse and at manipulating everyone around him, and that it's not my fault that I didn't know what was happening. My therapist has also been helping me understand that the most important thing I can do now is to support Emma and to help her heal. I've been thinking a lot about the signs that I missed or ignored, like how Emma was always anxious and withdrawn, how she didn't want to spend time with her father, how she would tense up when Richard touched her, how she had trouble sleeping, and how she seemed depressed. I've realized that all of these were signs that something was very wrong, but I didn't recognize them as signs of abuse because I trusted Richard, and I believed his explanations for Emma's behavior. I've learned that child sexual abuse often happens in families where the abuser appears normal and trustworthy on the surface, and that abusers are often very skilled at manipulating the people around them to avoid detection. I've learned that it's important to listen to children when they try to tell you that something is wrong, even if they don't explicitly say that they're being abused. I've learned that children who are being abused often show signs through their behavior, like anxiety, depression, withdrawal, sleep problems, or changes in their relationships with family members. I've been thinking about other children who might be in similar situations, who might be being abused by a parent or family member, and I want to tell the adults in their lives to pay attention to the warning signs. I want to tell them to listen to children when they try to tell you that something is wrong, and to take their concerns seriously even if the person they're accusing seems trustworthy. I want to tell them to watch for behavioral changes in children, like increased anxiety, depression, withdrawal, sleep problems, or reluctance to be alone with a particular person. I want to tell them that if a child discloses abuse to you, you should believe them, and you should report it to the authorities immediately, because children rarely lie about sexual abuse. I want to tell them that if you suspect a child is being abused, you have a legal and moral obligation to report it to Child Protective Services or to the police, even if you're not sure and even if the person you're accusing is someone you know and trust. And I want to tell them that the most important thing you can do for a child who has been abused is to believe them, to support them, and to make sure they get the help and protection they need. I've been thinking about Emma, and about how brave she is for having the courage to tell me the truth about what her father was doing to her. Emma could have continued to suffer in silence, but she found the strength to speak up and to ask for help, and I'm so proud of her for that. Emma has a long road ahead of her in terms of healing from the trauma she's experienced, but I'm committed to supporting her every step of the way. I've told Emma that she's not alone, and that she has people who love her and who will protect her. I've been thinking about the legal process, and about what will happen when Richard's case goes to trial. Emma will likely have to testify about the abuse, which will be incredibly difficult for her. But the prosecutor has assured us that they will do everything they can to make the process as easy as possible for Emma. The prosecutor has said that they have a strong case against Richard based on Emma's testimony, the medical evidence, and the evidence found on Richard's computer. The prosecutor has said that Richard will likely be convicted and will face a significant prison sentence, possibly decades in prison. I hope that Richard is convicted and that he spends the rest of his life in prison, because he deserves to be punished for what he did to Emma. I've been thinking about my own healing process, and about how I'm going to move forward after this experience. I know that it's going to take a long time for me to process what happened, and to come to terms with the fact that I was in a relationship with a child predator, but I'm committed to doing the work to heal, and I'm committed to being there for Emma and helping her heal as well. Thank you for reading my story, and if you've been through something similar, if you've discovered that someone you loved was abusing a child, if you've had to report abuse and protect a child, if you've supported a survivor of child sexual abuse, or if you've had to rebuild your life after discovering that you were living with a predator, I would love to hear how you dealt with it and where you are now. I'm still healing from this experience, still processing the horror and the betrayal, still working on forgiving myself for not seeing the signs sooner, and still figuring out how to support Emma as she heals from her trauma. But I'm grateful that Emma found the courage to tell me the truth, and I'm committed to making sure that she gets justice, and that she has the support she needs to heal and to build a good life for herself.